best thing that President Trump could do was say, look, it's over. I'm not going to support this. I never wanted it. It's not my war. I'm suspending all aid, and I'm pulling everybody out.
So recently, Douglas Macgregor went on Judging Freedom, that's Andrew Napolitano's podcast, to talk about the latest developments in Ukraine and how Trump can bring about a peace and disengage U.S. involvement if he wishes, and also how Keith Kellogg has reemerged and is playing a role in this whole ordeal. So let's watch and let's react.
Sure. Colonel, what do you make of the decision by Secretary of State Rubio and Special Envoy Witkoff not to attend the London so-called peace conference with the Russians, but instead to send General Kellogg, of all people?
Well, I guess it reflects an acute lack of interest in what's going to happen in London. And I think we have to expect nothing is going to come out of it, because there's not much evidence that Mr. Zelensky is willing to take any of it seriously and pursue any solution that involves Ukraine surrendering anything, especially territory. So I think that's the signal.
I mean,
it's interesting because it was said that Keith Kellogg had lost the confidence of this administration back in February, where he was excluded from an initial conference with Lavrov and the Russians early on, kind of in the decision to negotiate with Russia directly. And it's been said that, hey, he bungled his role in terms of being an envoy, and he would be excluded from some of these negotiations, but now he's back. It's interesting. A lot of people have long criticized Kellogg for being way too pro-Ukrainian. Trump got a lot of criticism, actually, for appointing him, and I can see why. But I think we know a little bit more here, because it's learned that Witkoff, who seems a lot more interested in bringing about a peace and getting U.S. involvement out of Ukraine completely, has recently met with Putin as early as today, I think just within an hour ago of reporting and recording this. So we'll have to see what comes from that.
The last person to defend him, but can he agree to surrendering territory as massive as Crimea and the parts of the oblasts now under Russian control and expect to stay alive?
Well, this is the argument, but this has been the argument for at least 2.5 years, that if he showed any inclination whatsoever to compromise on these matters, that he would be instantly killed by the radical nationalists that surround him. I mean, that may well be the case. But if that is the case, then that's further evidence for no attendance at the meeting as far as the Trump administration is concerned. Look, Judge, we've talked about this before. We have really nothing to do with this. From the very beginning, President Trump, unfortunately, did not distance himself. He should have. When he finally decided that there was an argument for peace, that came in June of 2022, and thereafter, whatever he said wasn't taken seriously because the administration pressed ahead. Then he took over and said he was going to end it in 24 hours. There was no chance of that happening, but that was a very stupid statement. And then he relied on the input from people like Kellogg, which was extremely ill-advised. Kellogg had a conflict of interest with his daughter's business interests in Ukraine, and frankly knew nothing about the place, the people, the area, or the war. So here we sit. Furthermore, remember, this war would never have happened had we not mightily supported the Ukrainians or this regime that we helped to bring into power in 2014 to attack Russia, because the whole idea was to build up a Ukrainian battering ram, as you put it, and hurl it at Russia.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree with Macgregor more here. He's right on the mark. Kellogg is to be distrusted. He doesn't really care or seem to care at all about actually bringing about peace. He only seems to care about aiding Ukraine, and that's status quo Biden policy. Witkoff, on the other hand, does seem to care about that, certainly much more than Rubio and Kellogg. And let's hope something comes from this meeting with Putin here. The one thing I'll say is that Macgregor did say that Trump hadn't disengaged from the start, and he's right. But I will just add, Trump did decide to withdraw and refuse to continue payments to Ukraine for a matter of a few days when he essentially had the most political capital he's ever had in this. When Zelensky waltzed into the White House, acted like he was entitled to the U.S. Treasury, and made an ass of himself. Trump did have the impetus to stop this forever, and then somehow, I don't know what it is, deep state impulses, neocon influences, Rubio pushing him to get enthralled by this crazy mineral deal. So we're back at status quo, except for we are engaging in negotiations. I'll give Trump that. I'm glad we are actually talking to the Russians, much like Reagan talked to the Soviet Union. So let's see what this brings about.
Right.
Oh, crazy. Why are we even involved? The best thing that President Trump could do was say, look, it's over. I'm not going to support this. I never wanted it. It's not my war. I'm suspending all aid and I'm pulling everybody out. Well, he didn't do that. So now what's next? I'm not really sure, but whatever happens, we look ridiculous again.
And it is ridiculous to expect that the Russians would accept anything other than their baseline demands.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Russian and everybody in the region knows the history, Crimea was never part of Ukraine. That's a lot of nonsense. And most of what we call Eastern Ukraine, except for areas in the northern portion of Eastern Ukraine, were always Russian. Come on. This is a waste of time. The Europeans are beating a dead horse. At least we've had the sense at this point to walk away, because what's important, Judge, is to normalize relations with Moscow. That's what's important to us.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that Ukrainians didn't even really put up too much of a stink, actually, when Russia took Russia took Crimea. And that is part of the U.S. decision to get involved in the Maidan Revolution and overthrow a democratically elected government there. Look, these regions in the Donbass, the Russian cultural regions, deserve to be autonomous if they want. I think that about every part of the world. I think about that in regard to the United States. If certain states want to be autonomous from the central government, they should be able to do that. So should Taiwan even, but the U.S. Treasury shouldn't bankroll their campaign to do so, in any case, in any country, regardless of the country. So I think Macgregor is right here. As long as the U.S. is clearly funding one side and funneling in money, Russia is not going to be inclined to want to use the U.S. as a mediator in a peace. We're a belligerent to them, and they're a belligerent to our government. And I despise our government. I despise most governments throughout the world, essentially all governments. So, again, we'll have to see what happens from this. I'm hoping that the Witkoff and Putin meeting pays dividends.
What's your general view of the sort of chaotic nature of the Trump foreign policy?
Well, there is no strategy. You have a national strategy. It has many components, military, economic, and otherwise. What is it? Have we defined our interests? I don't think we have. I don't think we've defined any interests for years. And so everything tends to be emotionally charged and impulse driven. We have no vital strategic interest of any kind in Eastern or Western Ukraine. If we have any interest in Ukraine, it's certainly west of the Dnieper River. And historically, that river line has marked the outer limits of what we called the West. Kiev, after the destruction at the hands of the Mongols, was really an outpost for the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and remains so. And if you go back to the First World War, let's forget the second for the moment, and you look at the front lines in Eastern Europe that the Germans established, they never went beyond the Baltic littoral in Poland, because they had no interest in anything else beyond that. That's where the war ended. I just don't think there is any strategic thinking of any kind whatsoever in the Trump administration. Not that there ever was with President Biden either.
Yeah, in some ways it's hard to disagree. Trump has been all over the place in terms of Ukraine. At times he boasts about the javelins that he provided in 2019, and at times he talks about how great this mineral deal was, which essentially seems to be off the table, which that's good, but that would have tied the U.S. closer to Ukraine than even it was before. And then at other times, he's willing to open negotiations with Lavrov and Putin. That's very good. We saw that in Saudi Arabia. We're seeing that now with Witkoff. But then he's employed people like Kellogg that are pro-Ukrainian zealots in the same administration, and Rubio, who has a track record of supporting Ukraine. Now, Rubio seems to have kind of slid into the role and wanted to kind of at least make Trump happy as being a public servant and part of his administration. But then that reflects this duality of Trump when it comes to Ukraine as well. So again, we'll have to see what happens. You know, Aaron Matei thinks that Trump is not going to go back to Congress and ask for more money for Ukraine, which is great. But I think it might take that step until we get to a place where Russia really legitimately feels that the U.S. is not going to keep bankrolling this whole thing.
Colonel, before we get into Israel, what is your take on the latest with Secretary Hegseth? Do you have contacts in the military who've expressed a view of the secretary off the record? I mean, is this just media hype, or is he really incompetent, and is the Pentagon really in chaos, and is that really dangerous?
Well, it's all dangerous, but I wouldn't say it's limited to the Pentagon. I think the Trump administration is in kind of a meltdown for the very reason that I just outlined. There is no strategy. People were picked not on the basis of any demonstrated character, competence, or intelligence. They were picked to hold key appointments in the Pentagon or in state because they were ideologically committed to the war against Russia and the war against everyone in the Middle East who is unwilling to bend the knee to Israel. That's it. There was nothing else going on. And so that's what you got.
Yeah, I will just say, though, that if this New York Times report is correct, and that's actually assuming a lot in many cases, it's the New York Times, though, Pete Hegseth was on the side of not allowing Netanyahu to strike Iran, not participating in support for that. So if that's true, some of these stories are really explainable, that this guy would be persona non grata to the deep state. They'd be trying to take him out because the Israel lobby wants nothing more than a regime change in Iran. It's wanted that for several decades. And if Pete Hegseth is the one standing in the way of that, and surely Dan Caldwell was, he was just dismissed as a subordinate from Pete Hegseth and talked about his experience with that on Tucker Carlson recently. If those things are true, then this would explain some of the hit pieces on Pete Hegseth. We'd never see these kind of pieces if Pete Hegseth was openly and publicly in favor of a strike against Iran. That never happens. It's only when these stories come out, someone is standing in the way. I think Tulsi Gabbard might be standing in the way too, according to that report. And that's why you see some of these stories. Well, Tulsi Gabbard, just change the intelligence. Change the intelligence to say Iran is close to acquiring a nuclear weapon. That's literally what some of these neocons are asking.
I think President Trump places far too much emphasis on whether or not someone who's appointed to a position like that does well on television. I mean, it's always nice if they do, but is that the most important or one of the most important facets? I don't think so.
I think he nailed it right there, and that's what he views as a value of having Hegseth. He can be somewhat charming, he's outspoken, he's articulate. Apparently Trump really liked him when he was on Fox and Friends or whatever programs he was on Fox News. They say he really liked him there. I've had mixed opinions on Hegseth, especially negative when it came to how he was involved in the Yemen strikes and selling that, and seemed to be much more concerned about how to sell that to the public than whether it was justified or constitutional. And just all the information that he put out in that signal leak that came out that said, you know, we just blame Biden for being weak to support this thing, or blame Iran. Well, that was garbage, but if he really was opposed to striking Iran, that's a good redeemable thing about Hegseth. Like I said, I think now there's probably a deep state effort to take him out because of his opposition to the strike on Iran, and that's what you're seeing. The second signal leak story that came out, it's hard to know if that's true. It might be true, because we know that there's a track record of that happening with Jeffrey Goldberg, and it wouldn't be as much of a stretch to believe that that could have happened again. I think supposedly roughly around that same time with members of his family. But again, I don't know if those stories would even come to fruition or come up if Pete Hegseth didn't urge restraint on Iran. But let me know in the comments below, do you think Douglas Macgregor is right, or is Trump, does he have a better strategy than Macgregor and I think? Let me know in the comments below. Do you think there will be a peace that comes to Ukraine as part of Kellogg's effort or Witkoff's effort? Would love to hear from you on that too. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And until I talk to you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll see you in the next one.